Good morning. Good morning. Sadly, this is our last morning with you. We're going to sneak out before the snow gets in after this. So I was just sitting there thinking like how much we've enjoyed coming up here. And also sitting there thinking like what a gift this is for you guys to be up here. There's probably some things about being up here that drive you crazy. There's probably some people that drive you crazy. Not probably, there are. But like what you're getting to experience up here is a gift. And there might be times in the future when you look back and you're like, man, that was good. Even with all the annoyances. So I would encourage you in your remaining weeks here, live into it. Maybe you're holding something back. Don't. You have one life and one shot at Joshua. And Becky and I have loved being here. I think back, we went on a hike when we were here the first time, and Lizzie, you shared your story of your life. That was a beautiful gift to hear that. Thank you. I remember last time we were here, Natalie, she has a poem about Costco. If you have not heard this poem, ask Natalie to wax poetic about Costco. It's beautiful. Just thinking about a conversation with Ernesto, who I learned last night can dance. Yeah. Keep it up, man. But more than that, the questions you asked me there were questions of somebody who was hungering and thirsting for Jesus. Keep doing that. Keep asking hard questions. If you don't get something or you don't believe something, don't hide it. You have people here that love you. You have access to incredible people. And if you have other speakers that come, don't hesitate to ask for their time. Stevie, you asking to get together with me, that's a sign of maturity and wisdom. It was an honor to walk up with you to Inspiration Point and just talk and pray. Like the people that you can connect with here, take advantage of it. When I was at Biola, one of my favorite things about my college experience was setting office hours with professors. And I would just put my name on Eric Tonnes's office hour walls. And I would have no idea what I was going to talk to him about. But when I got there, whatever question of what it meant to follow Jesus or what I was struggling with, and just sitting there one-on-one with somebody who cared and loved and was himself following Jesus. Like, you have opportunities here, and you may not always have that. So live into it. Even last night playing basketball, I'm a little sore, trying to guard Adari, his long shots. It's good stuff. And Peyton, man, you go for it. You go for it. This guy's intense. I love it. The energy. You guys are a lot of fun. Even our conversation about spanking. There we go. Discipline. That was good. And then Monday night, our conversation just grieving loved ones who've died. That was sweet. That was sweet. So, whatever annoyances you have, I'm not saying just try to get over them. Be honest with God. Be honest with your brothers and sisters. Love them. Enjoy the weeks that you have ahead here. Don't get caught in that, just looking forward to being out from underneath the rules or getting away from whoever annoys you. Too much of life is spent looking to be in that next stage. And then pretty soon the next stage is the grave, and you're like, what did I do? So dance like nobody's watching. Really. Do Joshua like nobody's watching. And on that note, I want to tell a little story about the small group we were in. We've been in small church groups for a long time. And in one of the groups, we were actually in this group with 6 couples from our apartment complex. We were living life and doing life together. and just meeting weekly to seek Jesus, and we'd have dinners together. And as throughout the weeks and months of listening to people pray as we were getting together, something began to something's at play here. What's going on when people are praying? Like something in my soul, just in that sort of, as the leader, the shepherd of the group, I began to be burdened, like something's off. And so this one Sunday evening, we're gathering, and we were going to pray, and I just said, hey, can we stop before we pray? Can we just not dive right into prayer? And I said, what is going through each of your minds when you're about to pray? What's going through your mind? What's going through your heart? And there was silence for a moment, and then somebody who lived into this gift of honesty, which is that way to Jesus, he said, you know what I'm thinking about when I'm going to pray? I'm thinking about what all of you are going to think about what I say. And that's exactly what Jesus says is not prayer. If you pray for others to hear, it's not prayer. They're not going to be able to answer your prayers. There are maybe some prayers we say hoping that somebody will do something. But what we need is God. We need Him. We need His grace. And again, I'm referencing things here. This idea of not praying for others to hear is from the Sermon on the Mount. And also in there is this exhortation, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So I want to encourage you to hunger. Ask the hard questions. Ask to get together with people. Be hungry for Jesus. And don't care what it looks like. People are going to forget you. The world forgets you. But God doesn't forget you. Be hungry and thirsty for Him and seek Him shamelessly. And don't care what people think. Again, I may have said this before, but I want to say it again. You know how many groups I've been in where people are like, well, I'm not really going to open up and confess in front of you until I can trust all of you. I just want to say bull crap. You can't trust all of us. Do you want Jesus or do you want perfect people? Because you're not going to get perfect people. And confession and being honest is the way towards grace and truth and walking with Him. So don't wait till you can trust everybody. Be hungry and thirsty for Jesus and move towards Him. So on that note, I want to actually live into a little bit of living out what I've been encouraging you guys to do, that apart from Christ, you can do nothing. And one of the best ways to live into that is to pray. Now, I've just told a story that might make you think twice before you pray, but I also want to encourage you, be hungry right now and pray. Now, if you can't pray out loud, pray in your heart. If that's safer, do that. Go into a room, Jesus says, and pray quietly. But if you can pray out loud, pray out loud. So I want to lift up some of the things, the guilt and the shame and some of that loneliness that we feel having been kicked out of the garden. And what I had talked about yesterday, the way of Jesus being a person. So what does it mean to pray, Jesus, help me to live into the complexity of walking with you, a person? What does it mean to live into the way that is impossible? Help me to live into that. What does it mean for it to be a way of grace and not me, that it's a treasure or that it's a cross? So we're going to take just a little bit of time here. If it gets silent, if it is silent, and you start to feel uncomfortable or pressure, like, oh, I need to pray because it's silent, don't worry about that. We don't need people to pray out loud. I'm not going to feel uncomfortable if there's silence for a bit. We're here to meet with God and together to be hungry and thirsty to receive that grace. We together, and that's the gift, this opportunity that you have up here together, is to actually meet Jesus at the well together, to walk with Him together. So, Father, here we are. Here we are. Jesus, here we are. Help us now. Would you bring things to my brothers and sisters' hearts, things that maybe they've heard from me this week, or things that they've heard from other classes or other teachers that maybe they haven't put into prayer. Lord, where they can pray out loud for all of us, Lord, give them grace to do that. And where they just need to pray in their hearts, Father, give them grace for that. And I pray too, Father, whatever they feel here right now, if they don't want this or if this feels uncomfortable, Father, help them to be honest with you about what's in their heart. And Father, I come even this morning, I wiped, as I was putting something in the trunk of my car, wiped it on the dirty back of my car, and I just cussed in anger. Father, I come as someone who I want my mouth to be even more righteous before you. I need your grace, Jesus.
Lord, I confess that I feel like a failure sometimes, and I try to please other people, Lord, instead of trying to please you, God. I'm so thankful, Lord, that you forgive our sins.
Yes.
Forgive us even in these times when we feel like you're down or you're not the best person ever, actually, Lord. I just pray, God, that I may lean into you, Lord, and understand what it means to be a follower of you and not of this world, or not trying to please others, or else I would not be a servant of Christ.
Thank you, Jesus, that you hear our prayers. Please help us to depend on you and abide in you through prayer every day of our lives. And Jesus, we wait on you here. The rain trickling outside, we wait on you. We wait on your grace. You in your grace. We wait for the grace to meet you in truth. We bring you our guilt and our shame. We bring you our pride that pushes that guilt and shame away. Jesus, we bless you. We need you. Please fill us afresh with your Spirit. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. So we're going to continue a little bit through some of these things about what is the way of Jesus. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like in the church. Some things I wish I had been told early on, living in the body of the church and following Jesus together. So we ended yesterday by saying that following Jesus, walking with Jesus, is walking in a way of love. But following Jesus is also living and walking with a man who is a man of sorrows. What does it mean that you are following and walking with a man of sorrows? When he lived on this earth, he was a man of sorrows. I think he still feels grief in heaven. A little over 2 years ago now, we ended up leaving a church. We'd been there for 20 years, and it was incredibly painful. It was brutally painful. I'm still, in some ways, and I don't know if I'll ever fully sort of heal from some of the grief and pain of what happened. And as I was grappling with that with God, we went to the Getty Museum. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's lovely. And I just walked off on my own. And I was walking through this exhibition. I don't think it was particularly religious, but I saw this little painting kind of in this corner. It was just me and this little painting that I saw, and it was Jesus. I could tell it was Jesus, but it was small and a little dark, and as I got closer, he had this massive crown of thorns, just like completely covering his head. And it became even clearer that his face was tilted, and he looked depressed. And I was like, ugh, that's not Jesus. Like, what? And I got closer, and there were tears just streaming down his face in this painting. And part of me just was like, yeah, no, I don't like this. I don't resonate with this. And then I read on the side the little plaque that explained this piece, and it said this was like a 15th century devotional piece of art that someone would have had in their home, in the place that they would pray. And that it was a reflection on the passage that Jesus is a man of sorrows and well acquainted with grief. Does your image of Jesus, does it have this idea, this reality that he is a man of sorrows? So if you're going to walk with him, part of that journey will be learning to discover his sorrows and learning that walking with him will bring you pain. You will experience great sorrow if you walk with Jesus. In fact, it'll break your heart. We have kind of adopted people into our family, like Jen. She's family. She stays with us when she comes down. She lives in our home. She's lived with us at various points for various amount of days. Some weeks, it's like she was there. Even when she had her own home down there, she'd be in our house every day of the week. And we'd be dancing. We'd have dance parties at night, and part of our small prayer group that we were part of. But there's some other people that we've done this life on life, adopting people into our home. And this one woman, young woman in particular, she had lived with us for like 3 weeks, and she had been kind of from a poor area of LA and a lot of brokenness from her childhood, and she'd connect with us deeply, and then she would pull away, kind of afraid that we were going to leave her. And we would literally drive to her house in East LA and like throw a penny up at her window. Be like, hey, we love you, we're not leaving. Life is messy, we're not leaving. And she had experiences, she taught me things from her experiences that blessed me and grew me in ways that I am incredibly grateful for. But this last year, she's pulled away. I text her every few weeks, and I might get a response and I might not. And she was part of our family. I mean, we interacted with her often. And I grieve. I've wept over it. Like, it's to love people is to open yourself to sorrow. In fact, C.S. Lewis, when he was a kid, he lost his mother. And he said, one of the ways to solve that is to close yourself off to love. Because then you close yourself off to sorrow. And you'll find that. You will find in the church that as you love people, you're going to be hurt. And you will have a choice. Do I close off? Do I not risk loving again? Or do I walk with the man of sorrows and embrace this aspect of what it means to follow Jesus? Now, I want to counter that as well, that the way of Jesus is also a way of joy. It is a way of joy. In fact, it's a way of joy that you will taste nowhere else. Nothing in the world will offer you joy like this. In fact, we read in the Word that we have joy unspeakable and filled with glory. The Psalms talk about like celebrating with like shouts of victory. I don't know if you've seen the videos of New York City after we won World War II. There's streamers falling down and people are dancing in the streets. Like, we live in that sort of victory. And the more we grow in faith and knowing that, like, all my sin is washed away. I have no guilt and shame. I am going to heaven. I will be with God for eternity. The more real that becomes, the more joy you have. In fact, this joy becomes so real that passage about joy unspeakable and filled with glory is in the context of people suffering. They're suffering, and yet they have joy. Unspeakable and filled with glory. I don't know, have you ever tasted that? Have you tasted joy that you can't even put into words? That literally is filled with glory. That is yours in Christ. And you will even taste it, and taste it more when you join Him in sorrow and in pain. Joy. In fact, Psalm 16, in the presence of God is what? The fullness of joy. And in His right hand are pleasures forevermore. So seek Him for your joy and for His glory. But know that walking with Jesus is a way of sorrow, but it's also a way of incredible, incredible joy. This next one, the way of Jesus, if you want to follow Jesus, is one, I don't know, and I feel like only in the last 10 years have I really started to try to get my head around this. The way of Jesus is a way of downward mobility, not upward mobility. We really, in the Western evangelical church, we really like stories of we went through some trial, things got better, and then look I got this ministry, and I got this big church, and I got it's all this fruit and all this. We love stories like that. We love, and these stories in which we start like the pauper, and then we become the prince. This is a very American thing. But the way of Jesus is not this, oh, I get more power. I get a voice. I can speak to more people. The way of Jesus is a way of having power and authority and laying it down. What does it say in 2 Corinthians 8:9? Does anybody know? For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty you might become rich. So Jesus, he has angels worshiping him. He comes to earth where he has people spit in his face. I don't know if you've had somebody spit in your face. It's profoundly unpleasant. I've never experienced it, but like I've talked to people and you're close enough to them and some spit gets on your face and you're like, you try not to let on that, I hate that. So I had a little brother that backwashed into his drinks. So like, so spit, I don't know, that like impacted me. But Jesus goes from angels, they don't even, like, they cover their face because he's so glorious and awesome. And he's like, I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to become poor so that through my poverty, you might become rich. And this is what Jesus is inviting you into. He's inviting you into this path of downward mobility, of becoming a servant, not a master, not looking for position, but looking for how can I love, how can I serve, how can I lose my life so that others will gain theirs. And this is where we will actually participate with Jesus. Jesus did this for us. He's made us rich. And that's where that passage I referred to yesterday, if we get this, if we get that for love, Jesus did this for you. He became poor. If that love hits us, then as in 2 Corinthians it says, for the love of Christ controls us, and then we willingly become poor for others. Now, again, we can turn everything into a formula. We can even turn this into a formula. We can turn becoming poor or tithing or whatever other way you want to kind of lower yourself as a way to feel good about ourselves. So in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says, if you give all your money to the poor and surrender your body to the flames, but have not love, it profits you nothing. So don't turn this into a formula either. Don't turn this into a formula. In fact, when I was in college, I remember it's like, well, God doesn't care about how much you give, because remember the story of the woman who gave the couple coins and she gives more. God doesn't care about how much you give. God cares about the percent. It's like, and I turned it into a formula. It's a certain percent that matters. Now, God does require your whole life. That's 100%. But we so quickly turn things like this into a formula. So the encouragement, I'm not encouraging you, just find ways to lower yourself. I'm encouraging you to love. And doing that will require you to lower yourself. And so be careful when you're in church. I'm stunned by how many times I will hear these testimonies or preachers online or whatever, sermons. You'll hear stories in which the trajectory of the story is this upward mobility. Or it's this story in which, there's some downward mobility, but the real focus is like, then things are great. Jesus carried a cross, and then he died on the cross. Now, then he was exalted to heaven. But in this life, are we willing to carry a cross downwardly mobile, and in this life then die? Like even in that experience that I had at that church that I was at for 20 years, I had been part of prayer groups, and I had devoted my life to this church. With all my health issues, I poured my heart and soul into my family and this church. And at times it felt like a cross, and we loved people, and we treated people like family. And I prayed for this church, and incredible, beautiful experiences. And it felt like a cross at times, but then the way it ended, I was like, this doesn't fit the story. How can it end like this? How could it end with this bitter ending? And then it was like, Daryl, what did you think carrying a cross meant? You get nailed to it at the end. So the reason I'm pressing into this is that as you go out here and maybe you go into ministry or something, or you get involved at your church and you pour out your life, and then things kind of blow up, because they're going to. I mean, read Corinthians. The church was a mess from the beginning. Read the letters in the book to Revelation to the different churches. They're a mess. Things were blowing up back then. And if you have this idea in your mind that walking with Jesus means, oh, I'm going to carry a cross and then he's going to show up and it's going to be great, which he might do. And I encourage you, pray for him to show up. Pray for miracles. Pray for revival. But if you think it's not going to end with a cross and devastation at times, that's going to really rock your faith. And you're like, why am I doing this? This isn't real. Well, no, this is actually the realest real. Paul says, what does he say? He says these incredible words. And I used to pray then. And I was like, what am I doing? He's like, I want to know Christ. Yes, I'm in on that. And the power of his resurrection. I'm absolutely in on that. Give me that. Oh, and I want to share in his sufferings. Maybe a little. Becoming like him in his death. Now again, I've talked a little bit about the brutality of the cross. If you actually sit with that, that is the invitation of your life. And there will be times, if you follow Jesus, if you walk with Jesus, that it will feel like you have died. Literally, it's almost 2.5 years later, and there's part of my soul of what happened at that church that is still longing for resurrection, that is still devastated and brokenhearted. And even over these last 2 years, for me, like I've had to just keep coming to people and keep being honest. Oh, this isn't going away. I'm discouraged. I'm having a hard time hoping in God right now. Because that cross, that death was so painful that it's like suffocating. It's suffocating. One of my mentors said, because I'd been at that church for 20 years, he was like, he told me he'd been at a church for 30 years and just devotedly shepherding these people. And as he tried to walk into grace and truth and teach them about grace and teach them about truth and model this truth, they rejected him. Let me tell you, if you go on this journey of grace and truth is really painful to people. People don't like that. It makes them uncomfortable. And so they got rid of this guy after 30 years of devoting himself to this church. And he told me, and this was years later, he told me, you don't ever fully heal from that. Your heart will actually have to expand. That part of your heart, you will live with scars. When you die on a cross, you have scars. Jesus has scars now in his resurrected body. So following Jesus will not only result in dying, but then there will be the scars from that. But then if you're willing to then go to Jesus in truth and say, why? I went to Jesus in anger. I went to him in sorrow. In fact, as I tried to navigate that, I was like, what are different ways? How can I approach God in truth? And I was reading the Psalms of Lamentation, and one of them was talking about sackcloth and ashes. I didn't find any sackcloth, but I went next door to my garden, and I got ashes, and I poured it on my head, and I tore my shirt, and I was like, this is how I feel inside, Jesus. This is how I feel. And I was like, oh, maybe this will make me feel better. And it was good to express my heart to God, but it didn't go away. I was kind of hoping it would go away. I wanted a little bit of that upward mobility. Like, I'm doing the right thing, God. Now let's move on from this. But when you follow Jesus, this downward mobility, this path of suffering, yeah, it'll hurt. Another thing that, again, that we struggle against, the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is a way of power, not through power, but through weakness. And again, this is not the American story. This is not the American worldview that we hear. We grow up and all our sports narratives are all about power through power. Our education, it's all about intelligence and strength. But the way of Jesus, if you want to walk with him, it'll be hard if you really, really don't like to be embarrassed or deal with the areas of weakness in your life. Because he's actually going to say, the area of weakness that you have, that's how I want to work through you. Not like, oh man, you're great, you're so intelligent. I need your intelligence to bring about the kingdom. He doesn't need your intelligence. And as much as we can hear this, it's a whole other thing to live it out. It's a radically different thing to live it out. Because everything in us, particularly as Americans, from our childhood, we're taught to move towards our strengths. We're protected from our weaknesses. Everybody gets a trophy. But when you walk with Jesus, it'll actually be walking into your weaknesses and almost making friends with them and realizing this is the area, this is the way that God is going to move in my life. And that's when you know it is by grace. This isn't by me, this is by grace. I remember I had been dealing with the massive health issues. They probably got really, really bad 2007. And I was probably 5 years into that. I was laying on my bed with a migraine. And for me, a migraine is when I'm just like, I'm done. I don't want this anymore. But I remember laying there like, God, why can't I just be better? Like my inclination is to fight. I'm a fighter. So I want to fight my sickness. I want to fight weakness. I want to push against it. But I'm laying there in bed and I'm like, God, if I could just be like seeking you or praying right now, like, wouldn't that be so good? And then it was like somehow a verse about this weakness came to mind. I was like, maybe I should actually give that a try. So I'm laying there just devastated by this migraine. I'm like, okay, God, here I am. I'm just a mess. I can barely even pray right now. I don't even want to be alive right now. Jesus, would you do something here in my weakness? And it wasn't like this profoundly mystical experience, but it was something that was transformative. It was this entering into my weakness, where Jesus shows up and brings peace and grace and transformation when I'm not able to do anything. I wasn't able to read my Bible there. Didn't want to turn the light on. I wasn't able to be praying these great prayers or praying with people. I was just alone in the dark. Here I am in my weakness. When God chose Moses, did he choose a good speaker? No. In fact, Paul says, when I came to you, when I spoke with you, I'm pretty bad at speaking, he says. I'm a sucky speaker. Now us, we really like good speakers. We kind of idolize good speakers. Boy, I'm a big fan of John Piper. I'm of this, or of Francis Chan. We love good speakers. And a lot of our speakers, it's fascinating. A lot of them, even like D.L. Moody, a famous speaker, a lot of them are really gifted speakers, and we're drawn towards that. And we become drawn to the person. And we're looking at the person rather than looking at Christ. But Paul, he said, I came to you and I spoke kind of weakly and fumblingly. So what? So that it would not be my power, but the power of Christ. You need, if you want to walk with Jesus, you need his power. You do not need your power. Your power, or John Piper's power, who put in there, whatever preacher or teacher, they don't have power that can transform you. They don't have a fountain of living water that can flow through you. But if you open in your weakness to Jesus, there will be fountains of living water that flow through you. So find little ways to explore. What are my weaknesses? What are the things I want to avoid? In fact, we tend to avoid our weaknesses because of our guilt and shame. I feel guilt and shame. I feel insecure about this. I'm going to avoid that. But as you experience the love of Jesus, you can actually embrace your weakness and then boast in the cross of Christ and the power that's there. And say, God, here I am. I'm offering you my weakness. That is the invitation. Will you offer Jesus your weakness and walk with him there? And again, that's not something, like I feel like that's only been in the last how many ever years of my life that I've even started to grapple with that, and it's still hard. I do not want to offer him my weakness. I don't. I want to offer him my strength. All right. The way of Jesus is a way of prayer. We've kind of alluded to this the whole thing, but the Christian life, like your whole Christian life, is prayer, growing in prayer. Don't ever think that you've learned the fullness of prayer. In fact, right now I'm still grappling. I'm wrestling with God. In fact, I think that is sort of a form of prayer. Jacob wrestled with God. I love that God, this infinitely omnipotent God, allows a human being to wrestle with him. And that's often what prayer will be like. It's wrestling with him, with your weaknesses, with the fact that you don't like dealing with your weaknesses. It'll be wrestling with him with your unbelief. It'll be wrestling with him with whatever you're going through. But the way of Jesus is, and like we said, it's a relationship. And that way is a way of prayer. And for me right now, I'm grappling with, particularly after having spent 20 years praying for this church, what does it mean, Jesus, to pray believing that you will receive something and it will be yours? Jesus says that. I recently sat with a pastor, and this pastor said, somehow this connected to his sermon. He was like, I was thinking about preaching on this verse where it says, pray believing that you receive it and it'll be yours. And he's like, but I actually didn't know what to say about it, so I'm not going to preach on it. Because honestly, this is one of those verses where it's, what do we do with this? And we can choose to be like, I don't know what to do with it. Or we can choose to go with God and wrestle with him, pray to him about it. God, what does this mean? And I'm in the middle of that right now. What does this mean? You say you act on behalf of those who wait for you. Well, I waited for you for 20 years. And you didn't act in the way I hoped you would. So prayer is this journey of relationship. It's a journey where you grapple and wrestle with God. It's a journey where you lay back and just luxuriate in his love. Prayer is so much more than what we've made it to be. There's these hills about 10 minutes from our house, and there's a trail that I will just drive up to, and I'll go on a walk with God. And I've been doing it for years. And off that trail is this, I'm kind of breaking the rules. I hope that's okay, God. But I go off the trail. It says don't go off the trail, but only by like 20 yards. And there's this fallen tree that I just lay on. And prayer can just be like just being with God. Just luxuriating. Like, here I am, Father. Here I am, Jesus. Prayer is walking into all the different ways in which God describes his relationship to us. God the Father and us. We're meeting a father. Now that's complicated for some of us with father issues. It's very complicated. But it's learning to walk with a father. It says that Jesus is our brother. It's learning to be a sibling to Jesus. Prayer. What does it mean? It says that he's our friend. Prayer is learning to walk into being a friend of God. That's not just a pie-in-the-sky idea. That's a real thing. If you walk with God and you learn to know him, you will become his friend. Again, man, if you had that on your your tombstone, so-and-so, a friend of God. That person was a friend of God. But again, that's going to mean pressing into that. It's going to mean, like we said earlier, this is a treasure that you must seek. You can't have both. The way of Jesus is an all or nothing proposition. You cannot love the world and God. You cannot serve two masters. So if you want to walk with God, if you want to be a friend of God, if you want to walk with Jesus and have joy unspeakable and filled with glory, you can't have that and the American dream. And honestly, I think this is the greatest and most dangerous lie that I see in our churches today. And we don't say it explicitly, but we imply it, we sort of live it, that you can have the American dream and the way of Jesus. And I'm not saying that God won't let you have a house or a car, whatever it is. You cannot make a formula. You cannot say, no, you can't own a home, or you can't own this, or you can't have what you would be associated with the American dream. But Jesus is saying your allegiance has to be with me. And if I give you a house, so be it. If I don't, so be it. With John, you're going to live. You're not going to die. Peter's going to die. He's going to be crucified upside down. You don't know what it's going to be. But in my experience, a lot of us, we want the American dream. It's like going to a restaurant. We're like, I really want the American dream. That's my main dish, and the side dish is Jesus. I'll go to church on Sunday. I'll pray. I'll do my devotions here and there, you know. But Jesus is saying, if you want to learn to walk with me, if you want this way, it's all or nothing. You cannot love the world and me. Those don't go together. Now, here's the fact. The fact of the matter is, you and I do love the world. I love the world. There's things in me that love it. There's things in me that really don't like the way of Jesus and the cross. There's parts of me that reject that. But the very way of choosing Jesus is by coming to him and being honest. God, I would rather have this than you. Yes. Please. Totally. So there's two things going on there. That verse where God so loved the world, he's speaking about loving all the humans. So that use of the term world is different. Okay. But here's the thing. We all love the world. The apostles love the world. The disciples of Jesus love the world. And they love Jesus. And they love the world enough that they had a vision for Jesus. Like Peter has a vision for Jesus because he loves the world and he loves the world that he wants. And so when Jesus says, I'm going to die on a cross, Peter is like, come here, Jesus. We're going to have a little talk, you and me. Okay, Jesus, this plan you've got? Nope. We're not doing that. Get behind me, Satan. Literally, it says, Jesus turned to the disciples and said, get behind me, Satan, where you should be. I mean, Peter, you should be behind me, following me. So you are not going to be perfect. You do love the world. The disciples had their version of loving the world. Ernesto and I were walking through some of this. There's grace. You are saved by grace. And at the same time, Jesus says, if you don't lose your life for my sake, you can't have me. That kind of, how do those go together? Like, you must lose your life, but you're saved by grace. You're not saved by losing your life. And it's going on this journey. And that's where prayer is going on an honest journey with Jesus of admitting how much you love the world and how much you love yourself. And saying, Jesus, here I am. I want to tell you this is not the way. I'm just like Peter. I don't want this. Here I am. I admit that, but I want you. And that's where this line is so beautiful. Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. There's this grace right in that statement. I do believe. I do want you. You are the treasure. But help my unbelief, help my love of the world. In fact, I love this tension, and if you watch and you read the stories in the Gospels of the disciples grappling with this. And Jesus does this. He's got crowds, man. He's got the megachurch thing going. He does these miracles. He shows power. Jesus does have power. He'll move in power sometimes. In fact, he says, I'll do greater things through you. You will do greater things. So I'm not saying power doesn't come. The power of the resurrection is real. But Jesus displays this power, and you know what happens? That power draws crowds. And Jesus realizes, look, they're drawn to power. And they have their own agendas, and that's not what this is about. And so what he does, he's like, okay, I've got this big following. You all have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. Now, one of the laws in the Old Testament, one of the laws that is really clear, you cannot drink blood. Like, that's a no-no. And Jesus is saying, you have to drink my blood. And most of the people walk away. Most of the people. I mean, Jesus has a movement here. Dude, he could send out a collection plate. He could build a nice big church. No. He says, eat my flesh, drink my blood. Most of them leave. And that's a question. If you end up in ministry someday, there's going to be this temptation to say things that will please people's ears, that will get them to stay. In fact, I just watched an interview from a mega church pastor who'd quit, and he said in the mega churches that he had been at in the UK and in America, he said that they refused. He would hear mega church pastors even admit, we will not talk about things that are offensive, that Jesus says, because we do not want to scare people away. That is not the way of Jesus. Jesus has a massive following. He says really hard things. Most of the people leave. And then he turns to Peter, who doesn't really want the cross, and he says, Peter, and you disciples, do you guys also want to leave? Do you want to leave too? And there's going to be moments in your Christian walk, if you walk with Jesus, where it's going to hurt so bad and Jesus says things and requires things of you that you do not want. And there's, do you guys want to leave too? Because you're going to watch. Right now, the church, I just started a YouTube video with a pastor that I love who's exploring this topic of deconstruction. Right now in the church is one of the biggest moving away from faith. Now, I actually think one of the reasons that there's so much deconstruction is that we've offered people this lukewarm, watered-down version of the American dream in Christianity. That's just not good enough. Like, it's no longer culturally cool to be a Christian. So why do this, like, hybrid thing? That doesn't work. But if we were offering Jesus to people in this hard, beautiful, glorious, terrifying way, I think we would have less people falling away. Yes?
About the American dream thing, I guess I don't really understand, like, what American dream, like wife, kids, house, dream job, you can't have that in...
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. So the American dream, in general, has been kind of, wife, kids, house, car, successful career. But really, in modern times, it's developed more into kind of whatever makes you happy, whatever suits you. And I'm not saying, please don't hear me as making a formula that you can't have a wife and kids and you can't have a house. But Jesus is saying, come follow me. And then there's this, and it's going to be different for each person what that looks like. He has people, Jesus says, come follow me, and one of the people says, I'll follow you, but let me go bury my father first. And Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead. No, come follow me. Come lose your life. And so at the core of this is this choice. Am I choosing you, Jesus? And am I willing to walk with you? And am I willing to surrender all of those? He might require it of you. The rich young ruler, Jesus, I want to follow you. Go sell everything. Go sell your American dream. Go sell your house. Go sell all your possessions and follow me. And that passage is incredible because it says Jesus looked at him and loved him. Jesus loved this man. He felt this draw and this compassion and love for him. And unlike the woman who weeps at Jesus' feet, this man, no, I actually want that. Whatever Jewish first century dream is. So if we're like, Jesus, I'll take you, but I also have to have these things, we're in dangerous waters. But if we're like, Jesus, here I am, I'll take you. I have a wife. I have 2 beautiful daughters. I don't have a house. I live in an apartment. But I actually, we have this empty plot next door to us. And we have slowly taken it over, and we have this incredible garden. And we have a tree fort in it and all these things that like you normally don't get if you have an apartment in LA. And so there's ways that God will give you good blessings. In fact, Jesus says to Peter when he says, if you leave house and father and wife for my sake, you will receive in this life and in the one to come blessings. So don't hear me as saying you don't get blessings in this life and the next, but it's a matter of allegiance and submission. Are you willing to say, I want you more than those things? And if those things become your pursuit, if you choose those things, I want these more than you, Jesus, that's where Jesus is making this line. He's saying, I have to be your master. You can't serve both. So it's about serving a master and prioritizing him and then being honest about how much you do want those things. Saying, Jesus, help me. Maybe I do want these things more than you. Help me with that. Help me with that. How are we on time? We're late, aren't we? Yeah, we're late. This has been good. This has been good. I've got more that I wish I could have said, but... What? Say it. I have too much more. I had some things about the church. The church is going to be painful. If you're going to love the church, it's going to be painful. But love her. As an individual, you have a relationship with God as a father, with Jesus as a friend, as a brother. But with the church, you have a relationship with God that he compares to a bride and his groom. Live into that, but know that the church will really hurt you. But that's part of what it means to follow Jesus. So, question?
Can you speak on that more actually? Because, most of us are going to be having to go, find a church
Yes.
in a couple months here, so
Yes. Speak in what way?
I don't know what you're...
Okay. All right. Are you good with me speaking on a little bit more?
Yes.
All right, let me tell the story. So I was part of this small men's group, and we prayed we got together and we prayed and we read the Bible together and we're memorizing scripture together, and it's awesome. Really good. Really rich. And then we decided to go on this little retreat. And one of the guys, the family cabin, we went up to this cabin on Mount Pinos. It's over the Grapevine into LA. And it was kind of a crummy cabin. It was old and dusty and messy, but we're having a good time. And then we played some games, and some conflict arose. And tension grew, and then we ended up having some theological discussion that really went off the rails. And anger, and it got bad. It blew up. It really blew up. And I remember driving home in the car thinking, I really don't ever want to meet with these people again. I don't want to keep meeting. I don't. Some of them were great, but 2 of them it was just this is bad. I disagree with you. How could you act this way? You guys are just jerks. I'm done. And I can't remember the timeline, but I had been reading, and I really encourage you. So this, Sam, for you, read the book Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And in that book, he says that we all have this sort of dream of what we want Christian community to be like, or the church. We all have this dream. And we all kind of interact in this sort of dreamy way. I like this, just like my group was. This is great, this is great. And we actually kind of act in a bit of our false self. Like every dating relationship, you're really just showing your best side of yourself because you like them and you want to be liked. But we have this dream of what we want church to be like. And Bonhoeffer says that that isn't really entering into the fullness of what God has for you. And for a church to enter into it, you actually have to reach a point of disillusionment with your church and with these people. And then you have to make it through that. And the only way to make it through that is by giving grace. They had to give grace to me. I had to give grace to them. And then your fellowship becomes about connecting in and through Jesus, and not because of you can give me what I want, or this is making me happy, or this is the community I want. In fact, we had that incredible community in that apartment complex with 6 couples. But I always said, if community becomes the goal and not Christ, I've got to leave. You cannot make community the end. Christ is always the end. And then community becomes rich. So be willing, and as you move into churches, realize that loving people, if you really move into it, is going to get painful, and it's going to require grace. But if you press through that, and that group became richer than it had ever been before, after we gave grace to each other and met each other in Christ. Okay, one other thing with church. One other thing. Some of what I've shared over this week has been from a professor, John Coe, that I've really enjoyed. And this is something that he pointed out that I find really important, is that churches, in their past, in some way, they experienced God in a very powerful way. So if you're at a more charismatic church, these churches often, people have had profoundly beautiful, real experiences with God in these more charismatic ways. Or if you're at like a Reformed church, or a lot of churches in America, like we have met God through hearing incredible sermons. Like, we've been taught great things. And then it's like, we love the sermon. Or if you go to a little more high church, these people have created this incredibly beautiful liturgy where the prayers are like biblical prayers, and people are meeting God through this. And what happens is you have in all these different church movements, you have people who really meet God, who sincerely meet God. But then if you study the history of the church, most churches start out really alive, and then eventually they sort of become a little more dull over time, and eventually they kind of fade. And one of the reasons that happens is that in each of these different church movements, we fall in love with the form rather than with Jesus. We start being more devoted, like we have to maintain, God moved in this way, it's all got to be about the sermon. It's got to be it's about learning. We really do experience profound things about learning, but then we turn our whole, like it's all about the sermon in a lot of churches. And then, well, where's prayer in this church? We're not really praying. We're spending a lot of time learning. And if you think that's going to work, you're in trouble. Or if you're at a more liturgical church and you fall in love with the liturgy, you're falling in love with the form and not Jesus. Again, walking with Jesus in church is realizing, okay, this is a group of fallen, broken people, and we have chosen a form. You need a form. You've got to have some sort of form. I actually would love someday to go to a church where it was like, let's be open to some more of like these more mystical ways of meeting God, of the gifts. And then the next time we meet, let's use liturgy. Like, let's pray these beautiful prayers and join with the saints of old. And then the next time, let's hear some incredible preaching. But we tend to get married to a form. Be married in your heart to the pursuit of Jesus. Follow him and be wary of falling in love with forms. But again, and this is one of the things that if I had had time, what we would have done, we would have gone to Revelation, and where John is writing letters to the churches in Revelation. And each of those churches, almost all of them, are really, really messy. And one of the main reasons that people deconstruct and leave the church and will leave the faith is over church hurt. And if your faith is grounded in kind of how well church goes, you're in trouble. Or what you get out of Christian connection and community, you're in trouble. But if you have your eyes set on Jesus and you're seeking him, church hurt is going to happen. In fact, what we would have done is we would have read each of those different, the church letters in Revelation, and I would have asked, what church hurt would have been experienced in this church? This church, there would have been some sexual sin. People would have been actually abused sexually. This church, there would have been some real abuse of power by the leaders. This church, it's a bunch of lukewarmness. This church, they love money. What sort of church hurt would happen there? And what does it mean for you to be faithful in walking with Jesus in all of these different churches? So you're going to go, when you leave here, you are going to have choices about churches. Maybe you'll just go back into the church that you grew up in or the one that you were at before. And there will probably be ways in which you start seeing problems. You've heard some incredible talks up here. You've learned from so many different people, and you're going to be like, this isn't good. Oh, wow, why are we doing this? Why are we married to the form? So be careful about just trying to rush in and fix things. Apart from Christ, we can do nothing. Pray. Love your brothers and sisters, but always be pursuing Christ. And find people in the church. Find others who are making Jesus the ultimate pursuit of their life. And I feel this tension right now. We have friends that when we hang out with them, they love Jesus. They're trying to follow Jesus. But when I hang out with them, I feel more drawn to the American dream. And then I have some friends that when I hang out with them, I see in their eyes this, I have been loved by Jesus. And dude, I don't care what car I drive. In fact, this one guy just a couple of weeks ago, because I was like, both of our cars are almost 20 years old. And I was like, it'd be nice to have a nice new car. And I got in the car with him, and he got in my car, and he was like, man, I love your car. I love that you drive a 20-year-old car. He's like, keep it up. I was like, my car's working well. Do I need a new car? I mean, it had some weird sounds, but it works. It drives fine. But it was such a good word for me of like, Daryl, you don't need a new car right now. You want one? Yeah, I do. But I want Jesus more. And here I have a brother who's reminding me what really matters. So find people who meet with you one-on-one. Find little groups of people that are following. In fact, again, my mentor, John Coe, would say that in the church, there's a lot of people who have heard sermons their whole lives, and they become what Soren Kierkegaard called gentle Christians. They've heard sermons. They know all the right things. I'm supposed to love my family and love my kids. But honestly, that really experiencing transformation isn't so simple, especially if you're trying to live this American dream thing. So a lot of people go to church, and half of them are gentle Christians who are just, yeah, that's right, but I don't know what to do with that. And they just sort of enter into this sort of like neutral. And my encouragement to you is always be looking for people who have seen Jesus and who are seeking him with all their heart. And then love the people in the church. Don't give up on her. The church is a mess. Love her. Pray for her. Be patient with her. Lay down your life for her with Jesus. And you might die on a cross doing that. But there is joy unspeakable and filled with glory. And let me tell you, when I meet with other people, when I pray with other people, and I've always done that, just gathering together to pray is like, it's like the compass of your heart that's focused on Jesus. When you go out in the world, it gets distracted. It turns. But when you gather with people just to pray, just to walk with Jesus together, it's like, oh, wow. This is life. So Jesus, here we are. I pray that you would expand the vision of these dear brothers and sisters, their vision of you. Would you become so beautiful to them that everything on this earth is a shadow? Would you be so glorious to them that they can dance like David before the ark, shameless and not caring what people think? Jesus, I pray this over them, and I don't want to pressure them. Lord, let not these words be burden to them. Jesus, we are coming to you together as poor in spirit. You alone have the words of life. You alone and your grace can change us. We seek you. Fill these dear brothers and sisters with your Spirit. Give them wisdom as they go back down the mountain and integrate into your church. Give them grace to navigate that world. Keep them from the enemy. Keep them through church hurt. Keep them seeking you. Lord, give them brothers and sisters who love you with all their hearts and run after you with everything. Lord, bless them. Lord, bless their last weeks up here. Bless their trip to Turkey, Father. Lord, may those stones, as they look at ancient stones, may you teach them more about yourself, that you are the cornerstone. May you remind them that it doesn't matter that they didn't get to go to Israel, that you, the living God, they are the temple. Jesus, awaken them. Awaken me. You alone can do this. In your name, Jesus. Amen.